February's looking like it's going to be a decent month for shooters, with the remaster for Star Wars Dark Forces out soon, along with the full release for Wrath Eon of Ruin. But there's also something in the works that I don't think most people are even going to know about, and that's the follow-up to a lesser-known, arguably infamous shooter named the Citadel, one that came out a few years back. Easily one of the most unique first-person shooters to come out in recent years. The Citadel was created by a Japanese developer whose name I still can't pronounce, and originally released way back in 2020. It was a game set in this dystopic future after humanity has more or less been wiped out, where you played as the Martyr, a genetically modified superhuman tasked with killing a bunch of angels and then eventually what was more or less God, using an impressive arsenal of weapons and murdering countless cultist cyborgs along the way, proving that the only thing better than cultists and cyborg enemies in video games is when those two are brought together. And overall, it was a fun, violent experience with satisfying gunplay and a suitably dreary and depressing vibe. The bulk of the campaign had you making your way through a series of drab, monotone environments that really captured the feeling of living in this futuristic hellhole. But what really made it memorable though was the sprite work and the art style, along with some over-the-top graphic violence that showed all these otherwise cutesy little anime characters getting killed in pretty horrific ways.
That's tight. That's beautiful. That's nice. What's that?
And sadly too, as a result of that, the game got a lot of unwarranted negativity when it launched, with the focus being shifted from the art to the artist, literally, with the whole thing even being incorrectly labelled as a fetish game. And it's a bit of a shame that some people chose to focus on that over the top of what was otherwise just the machinations of a guy who very clearly had a love of anime and manga, along with video games like Doom, Marathon and Wolfenstein 3D. So yeah, in case it ain't obvious, I thought the Citadel was pretty rad.
No shit.
Which made me more than pleasantly surprised to discover that a sequel's also in the works, with a recent demo being available for download if you're able to navigate the website that it's hosted on. I mean, yeah, dog, make your way through a series of confusing pages and you too can play beyond Citadel version 0.12. And yeah, like I understand that this is very, very early days here, and this isn't even close to being any kind of complete, but it's really one of those instances where I couldn't stop playing something. The current build of the game really only goes for about 30 minutes, and I think in fact most people could probably beat it in less time than it takes to watch this video. But it's the kind of thing I just found myself able to replay over and over without ever really getting bored. The map design isn't very exciting or even all that elaborate, being more or less grid-based, with you moving from square room to square room, shooting enemies on more or less the same level as the player. And the enemies aren't super intelligent either, and often do little more than just head in your general direction, if not hang back and shoot you from a distance. The only real annoying ones you've got to contend with are cultists holding these full body shields, but they can be dealt with by a grenade or a well-placed shot. And then about the only puzzles you've even got to deal with is just activating buttons or finding keys, which are more or less highlighted blatantly on your map as well. So it's hardly going to win any awards for creative level design or super intelligent enemy AI. But despite all of that, it's a great example of how if the foundations of the shooting are so solid to begin with, well then everything else is just going to kind of fall into place. It actually reminds me a lot of playing through Sulaco, another FPS with a female lead and incredibly violent gunplay, which also happens to be in its early days. And again too, like even though that story is absolutely lacking any real direction, replaying those same few levels multiple times just never gets old, because the core mechanics are engaging enough that it doesn't really matter. So if all you wanted to do was horrifically maim and murder a bunch of anime girls, well, then you've come to the right place, bitch. Right, so in the first game, the overall goal was that you were killing a bunch of angels responsible for constructing the eponymous Citadel, which is this giant megastructure that housed the surviving human race. Now in the sequel, as far as I can tell, you're hunting down the creatures responsible for the collapse of humanity to begin with. Yeah, that original cataclysmic event that resulted in humanity being brought to the brink of extinction. Once again, you're playing as the Martyr, awoken from her cryogenic beauty sleep in the intro, and then forced to leave the safety of the Citadel to hunt these deities down. killing enemies, but also interacting with various other NPCs along the way, who wear such strikingly opposite outfits that it's just downright confusing. I mean, if they're not dressed like Mormons, they're dressed like they're about to upload content to their OnlyFans page. Currently, there's only one playable episode, which is broken down into 6 levels, with the 5th level being a boss fight against the first demon. And it's kinda hard to also not compare it to Ultra Kill. I mean, the premise alone is kinda similar, along with that aesthetic of these metallic environments and religious themed enemies. You even end each level by dropping down a large shaft. Yeah, and not the same kind of shaft that your mother's a pro with.
You can't keep getting away with it!
It is kind of hard to determine whether or not Beyond Citadel is good on its own merit, or if it's just because it's building upon what the first game did so well. And look, truth be told, I haven't played the first game in a couple of years, but I do remember it having some satisfying gunplay. And either way, what's great about this sequel is how instantly you get addicted to that shooting and that combat loop all over again. A lot of which comes from the satisfying sound work, but also the way that enemies seem to explode in this pile of guts and collectible gold pickups whenever they're killed. The sequel again just shows off this insane amount of detail with the sprite work, along with a truly in-depth gore system that makes for some gruesome kills. Kind of thing that makes the Soldier Fortune games look like Barbie's Race and Ride in comparison.
Bye-bye, bunny.
Which means even after you've killed someone, you can still pretty much shoot them to pieces, with entire chunks of their body being able to be shot or even kicked away. If you've damaged someone's helmet during combat, for instance, you can even see their terrified face behind it, and it's common to see a downed enemy still clinging to life with bated breaths, begging to be put out of their misery like Old Yeller. And that pure ASMR from the sound design you get whenever you remove someone's head from their shoulders really just kind of helps to highlight that lethality of all your weapons. It just really captures that tone the dev's going for, being this dark and gritty world that really doesn't pull its punches. And the whole thing's about as hostile as a microwavable burrito. As for the combat and the weapons, well, the sequel definitely does tread some familiar ground, but it also manages to offer up an arsenal that feels different from its predecessors. So for the melee weapon, you primarily got the axe, returning from the first game, which again, isn't really all that useful, outside of just conserving ammo against those more basic enemy types. The 44 Auto, though, is the first handgun you're going to get, and this thing does decent damage, has a fast enough fire rate, but is limited by its range, with that projectile dropping off pretty quickly. The alternate fire mode has your character turning the gun sideways, which, as you'd expect, makes your aim go to absolute shit. But it does have the positive effect of, looking pretty cool. All up, it's a decent weapon, and if you focus on aiming for the head, you can wade through most enemies with complete ease. After that, you'll find the lever action rifle, which is more or less just a free headshot generator, taking out most enemies in a single well-placed round. Which again, really never does get old, seeing that pile of health or gold pickup spewing out of that chest cavity after each kill. Without a doubt though, the best weapon in this current build is the shotgun, which is just absolutely fucking devastating. And it has all the hallmarks you'd expect with an FPS boomstick. Doing about as much damage as you'd want, but also causing the right amount of carnage. Again, killing most enemies in a single shot. I mean, I've often said you can judge an FPS off how good its shotgun is, and if we're using that metric as the grading system for Beyond Citadel, well, then this thing gets top marks all around. And look, maybe I'm a simple man, but I just enjoy the basic pleasures in life. In this case, that being a shotgun, which has the ability to send someone's torso to the goddamn Shadow Realm. The other main weapon you come across in the current build is an automatic rifle, which has an insane amount of recoil when firing, but shines when fired in short bursts and in the general direction of an enemy's face. And also too, like the rifle, you've got the benefit of a grenade launching alternate fire mode. I also appreciate the fact that this one's a bullpup, which is something that we truly need more of in first-person shooters.
He's right,
It is lacking that over-the-top laser alternate fire mode from the first game, but then again, considering how broken that mode was, maybe that's a good thing. And then apart from that, you've got the secondary items, like throwing knives and grenades, the former of which I didn't really use all that much, seeing as they're only able to be used with the axe. though I did throw around my fair share of grenades, which are perfect for enemies with shields or turret placements that end up getting dug in like an Alabama tick.
Son of a bitch is dug in like an Alabama tick.
Also too, if you want to be as much of a loser as I am, you can replay the levels multiple times to farm gold to buy the other weapons. Though, I do have to say that I found these to be a bit underwhelming. The first one is just a snub-nosed revolver, which seems to do less damage than the 45. And then the other one is the classic Magnum, which again, funnily enough, doesn't seem to be as effective as the automatic. And that right there is a damn shame, man, because that Magnum-style revolver has absolutely earned its way into the top tiers of video game weapons. And a gun like this just deserved better. I mean, if a Magnum revolver in a video game ain't turning someone's head into antimatter with a single shot, well, then something's gone horribly wrong. The only other weapon in the current build isn't even really a weapon, it's more like a suit of armor you get for the first boss fight where the gun barrels are built into your fingers. And then on top of that, it gives you near invulnerability, so combined with that and the insanely high fire rate and the damage output, it just makes it almost impossible to fail. But it's not really the weapon lineup which I found to be so addictive, because truth be told, we've seen these weapons a dozen times before. Instead, what makes the shooting so engaging is beyond Citadel's approach to how all these weapons handle, kicking things up a notch from the first game and adding in even more mechanics. So if you want to, you can just choose to play this as a regular first-person shooter. That being, you shoot into a round of bullets and then just press R to reload, that kind of thing. But if you've got the patience, it offers up a slightly more involved system, where instead, when you're out of bullets, you have to manually remove the magazine first, before then putting it back into the weapon and cocking it before firing. And with the shotgun and the rifle, you'll also need to pump the weapon before the next shot can be fired too. You can also just bypass this mechanic entirely and do a quick reload, dropping your current magazine to the ground and quickly putting in a fresh one. Though, doing this, there's then a likelihood that this might destroy the magazine when it hits the ground. On the off chance that it doesn't though, you can simply pick up that magazine when the coast is clear. In fact, you can even pick up single rounds right off the ground if you really want to. On top of all of that shit, there's even a chance that the weapon can jam, which adds a nice element of pants-shitting suspense during heavy combat, and again kinda reminds me of Far Cry 2. Now, it's not quite as confusing and complex as the shooting and reloading mechanics in a game like Receiver 2, but it's just the right amount of gun porn to separate it from just being another run-and-gun shooter. And overall, I found it to be a really cool system that makes the combat a lot more rewarding. Simply because you just can't really afford to spray and pray, as reloading your weapon can actually take up a fair chunk of time and leave you vulnerable during the process. The fact that the weapons have quite a bit of recoil also emphasizes that importance of taking your time and keeping your shots precise, which kind of works well in tandem with the whole leaning mechanic. Beyond Citadel's even got that really awesome feature where you can hold up a weapon and pull back the slide to see if any ammo is even currently inside it. I mean, you don't ever really need to do this, seeing as your ammo's shown clear as day on your heads-up display, but I've just always been a sucker for this kind of mechanic. It's really one of the most overlooked features in first-person shooters, and to be honest, it's something we need to normalize.
He's right, you know.
So yeah, you could probably play this whole thing on normal difficulty as a run-and-gun shooter if you really wanted to, but playing on hard mode with all the various weapon handling features turned on, along with slowly peeking around corners and taking out enemies with well-placed headshots, just kind of really feels like the best way to do it. And the fact that the weapons aren't hit scanning either and bullets have actual velocity and drop off means you can't just hang back from the other side of a room and take enemies out with a bunch of cheap shots. I mean, look, you know what, you probably can, but getting in closer definitely improves your chances. And again, it just feels like the way the game's meant to be played. I also appreciate a lot of the subtle details in the gameplay and the interface. Like how the martyr's portrait is going to change to show how much damage she's taken, which really is a feature from a bygone era. And in fact too, if you run out of stamina, she'll even make that face.
Oh, dear God, no!
When the game first begins and you put your combat helmet on, you get this brief moment before the heads-up display loads in, which is pretty cool too. And the type of armor you're wearing is also again going to change your portrait as well. Speaking of armor, shooting apart statues lets you pick up all these various shards. And again, the more you've got, the more it affects your portrait, eventually covering up the player entirely.
Cool. Yeah, it is cool.
But probably the most important mechanic is that every time you look down at the ground, you see this.
Lord have mercy.
Yeah, talk about immersion.
Let me see that again. I didn't get a good look at that.
Reminds me a lot of my younger years playing Jurassic Park Trespasser and checking on my health all the time. And truly a crucial gameplay feature as well, especially for a first-person shooter and one that works great for immersion, you know, among a bunch of other things. It's really important to check the ground as much as possible too. I can't stress this enough. Know what I'm saying? Like, really take the time to scan the area and make sure there's not going to be any hazards around your feet that are going to make you trip up.
Excuse me, brother. Miss Parker! Miss Parker!
The only other real features worth mentioning are the inclusion of this Bioshock-inspired cryo chamber, which sets up a respawn point on the current level for whenever you're killed, and make no mistake, you will be killed. Along with an upgrade terminal that lets you improve basic stats, which I'm like 50% certain was also in the base game.
Wrong!
This is where you're able to put points into health, reducing weapon recoil, and lowering the chances of dropped magazines getting destroyed. You know, basic stuff. I also like the fact too that, again, this is a game that's blissfully aware of its influences. I mean, the difficulty selection, for instance, is pretty much the same as the one from Quake was. Plus, there's a definite JRPG vibe to everything as well, with the serene and calming nature of all the interlude sequences and the hub area being in pretty stark contrast to the violence and the chaos of the moment-to-moment gameplay. I mean, it's like coming across the inn in a Final Fantasy game, where you get this welcoming music and a gentler tone, with NPCs all standing around selling you items, and the whole place just being a respite from the nightmare that awaits. Having said that though, there is definitely something going on with the overall vibe of the protagonist and her so-called brother. And look man, I don't know exactly what their deal is, but I think it's safe to say that their relationship is full-on Lannister mode.
I understood that reference.
But look, I mean, it's still pretty early on here for me to be able to really rip into this thing and critique it properly. And there's only so many things you can say about a demo that lasts the better part of half an hour. I will say that I do hope we're going to see the return of those combat abilities like the bullet time for instance, and the level design definitely needs a bit of ramping up, literally, because right now man, it's pretty damn basic. But overall, like for a free to play demo, there's not that much to fault here. It's a bit of a shame there's no kind of Kickstarter or Patreon page where you can support the game, and short of the dev releasing it into early access, I don't even know if there's a way you can track its development. Either way though, it's plain to see that the developer's definitely working on something very unique here, again. And if you're after the best possible way to shoot anime women in the face, well, look no further.